Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the podcast. And I'm delighted to be joined by Todd. You can see from the book cover that he's got in the background there that Todd is an author of his story of how he was an undercover cop with a death wish. And we're going to hear some of that story today and how we can use the lessons that Todd has learnt in our own lives in those difficult and challenging conversations. Todd, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nicky. I really appreciate this. I've been looking forward to this one.
Thank you. So, Todd, just tell us a little bit about your journey and your story and how you are here today talking to us about your life.
Yeah, 100%. At the moment, I'm 53 years of age, living over in Australia. I have all my life. I live in Queensland, and my story goes is I grew up in a very, very protected family, with no trauma, with no issues. Quite cocooned. Went to a Catholic school, and couldn't ask for a better you know, growing, like, yeah, growing up, sorry. And, you know, I suppose in the police that I've been, I've seen a lot of dysfunctional families, and I certainly didn't come from one. So, I ended up joining the police when I was 23 years of age. And I sort of was a little bit lost. I didn't really know what to do, and I sort of just fell into it. There was no one in my family that had done it, and I had a couple of schoolmates that had done it, and it was sort of almost that I just, a mate of mine said, "Why don't you do it?" And I went, no, I'll give it a go. If I get in, I'll get in. If I don't, I don't. And I got in. So, but once I got in, I didn't look back. I really loved it. I loved the camaraderie. I loved the academy. I loved, being around, you know, you know, the the brotherhood, the sisterhood. It was pretty cool. I just really enjoyed it. And this was back in the late 90s, 96, 97 is when I joined the cops. And I got sent down to the Gold Coast, which I don't know if a lot of people, whoever your listeners are, is it's in Queensland. It's surfers paradise, and it's a bit of a glitter strip. It's got a bit of a seedy underbelly, and there's nightclubs and you know beach and surf and all that sort of stuff. And after a while, I met a girl, and she was a little bit older than me. She was 30. Um, um, she'd had a failed marriage with a son from that marriage, and she was, in my eyes, she was just beautiful. She really was. She stood out. When I first saw her, I thought she was well above my pay grade. Um, Not only with her worldly experience, I felt like I was still a kid. She was a woman, and but as young and stupid, I thought, well, I'll give it my best shot. And after many many attempts, she finally agreed to go out with me. And next thing you know, it moved very quickly, and I moved in with her at a beautiful rural property on the hinterland of the Gold Coast at Mudgeeraba. And we were having a really good, nice time. We went over to Bali on a holiday. We were inseparable for probably 12 to 18 months. And things. I went from being a bit of you know a bachelor to learning how to dodge the Legos and the movies at night and all that sort of stuff. And it was a bit of an eye opener for me. But I sort of realised that was where I had to sort of start going, and I had to start growing up, and I actually really enjoyed it. I actually loved it. Um, and it wasn't until you know she actually fell pregnant in November, or she told me in November of '99, and basically we decided that it wasn't gonna um, she wasn't going to keep it, so she had a termination. Uh, and then moving forward to New Year's Eve on '99, I I had to work the night shift, being still 2 years into the police.
Mm.
Still had to do the hard yards, and everyone our age can remember the Y2K millennial bug. That was supposed to be the end of the world, and the New Year's Eve down the Gold Coast it was just, it was deafening. It was amazing. Like I've never experienced a New Year's Eve since where the panic, the excitement, the loudness, everyone thought that it was the end of the world the next day.
Right.
And we went to dinner before I went to work at 10 p.m. and I had the old Nokia 6110 in my pocket, and I didn't do the enter and star lock or whatever, and I did a bit of a pocket dial. So I picked it out, and I was having dinner with a few people and I said, "Oh, have a look at this." It said 666 on it, and I said, "Look at this. Looks like we are gonna, it's the end of the world tonight." I just got a message from the devil. I just made a joke of it. I didn't think anything of it.
Mm.
And then I spent, the night as we did, stopping a million fights, picking up drunks and all that sort of stuff. Um, my girlfriend Karen, she had been out in a nightclub, and I picked her up at 5:30 in the morning, and when I finished work, and we drove home, and it wasn't, we sort of went to bed then because I actually had to start work at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so I was pretty tired, and uh, anyway, woke up an hour or so later, and Karen's ex-husband had dropped the 4-year-old over, and what I realised is that Karen had forgotten to go and pick him up. I could have done that at the same time as well, but it must have slipped her mind. She had a good night and all that sort of stuff. And she was a bit upset about it. She was saying, I've been a bad mum. I've been a bad mum, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, you're not. You're just tired. Come on. You really need to get some sleep. Yeah, it's probably 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning by now, and she probably hasn't had more than a half an hour sleep. And anyway, I told her, let's put a movie on for Clark, lock all the doors. Once you put a movie on, no, will not move, and we'll get a couple of hours sleep, eh? Did that. I woke up a couple of hours later with Clark, the young fella, sort of saying to me, Mummy, where are you? Mummy, where are you? Where are you? And I rolled over. Oh, I rolled over and she wasn't there. I went, oh, that's odd. Uh, and I picked him up and I said, oh, well, let's go and find her. She could be just in this room. She's in this room. And I made a joke about it going, in this room, is she in this room? Boom. Nope, not in this room. This room? Boom. No. At no stage did I ever think what I was going to end up finding. At no stage. I just did not. We'd never talked about it. We'd never experienced a mutual friend being involved in suicide. No one, it wasn't a discussion that we'd ever had. She'd never said she didn't want to be on this earth. She'd never said, I want to kill myself, all that sort of bullshit. So that when I'm Karen Clark and we had to go outside to go down to where the laundry was. And at no stage did I ever think that what I was going to open was going to be the change of my life.
Mm.
Where I opened the sliding door and there she was. She'd used an electrical cord to wrap through the rafters and around her neck. And she was, she's, when I look back now, she was quite clearly dead.
Mm.
But, you know, the shock, the hit, the just the I felt like it was like a truck hitting me, or a train hitting me. Like it hit me so hard that I had no breath left, and my legs go away. And I think I'd love to have got a video to see what my actual reaction is compared to what my memory is, because I don't reckon it would have been the same,
Mm.
because I was just totally dumbfounded and just in shock. But I do remember my first thought was that I threw, young Clark out of the door because I didn't want him to see his mum like this.
Mm.
And I slammed the door back and I just started crying. I just started yelling. I just started howling. And I was like, what have you done? Why? Why, Karen? No, please, please, please. This is a joke, surely. And I didn't know what to do. And I picked her up and tried to get the weight off her.
Mm.
And, she was only a 46, 47 kilo girl. She was a small girl, but she felt so heavy. I could hardly pick her up. And I was up there and I'm trying to get it from around her neck, but the electrical cord was so wrapped and so stuck in between each other. It just wasn't budging. It wasn't budging. I needed another hand, and I didn't have it. It was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So I put it down. Yeah, and I remember going through my mind, going, "Oh God, did that just kill her? Did that just kill her? Oh shit, shit!" Not knowing, well, knowing in my real brain that she was dead,
Mm.
but I felt shit, shit. Just did I do something? So I ran upstairs and got a knife and came back down and cut the cord and then laid it down and wrapped it back around, got it off her and started CPR. And, I don't know if I did it for 5 minutes or did it for 55 minutes. I honestly don't remember.
Mm.
But the way it went is, at some stage I decided, this is not happening. It's not working. I could tell, her neck wasn't good. She wasn't responding to anything. And, and I decided that's it. I've got to go and get Clark. I don't know where he is, what's happening. I didn't know how long I was inside. And so I went outside and luckily he was just standing right there. I went, oh, thank God. I picked him up, I'm crying, eyes out. And like, he's just going, what's going on? What's going on? And I don't even know what I said to him, but I rang the triple O and said, get someone here ASAP. End up being my work colleagues that, I worked with last night in this and the people who I was supposed to work with in the afternoon as well. And which was, pretty awful as well. Having to bring your personal life into your work life was didn't, I just didn't like it. Next thing you know, it was almost like a movie set. There was that many cars, that many emergency services in the street. It was bigger than Ben Hur, and I didn't know how to deal with that. I was like way too much going on, and I rang my mum and dad who lived in Brisbane, who was an hour away, and they came down, and mind you, this is 2 or 3 o'clock on New Year's Day.
Mm.
Uh, I remember when I spoke to mum, she flipped it. She didn't know. She didn't understand what I was trying to say because I probably wasn't making sense, but she couldn't understand what had happened. But she's going, your dad's down the bowls club. He's having a beer. Like, how do we get down there? I don't know. Like all of these things. And um, yeah, so they did end up eventually come down um, and luckily they picked me up and took me back home to Brisbane. And then that was the start of the new world for me. I've said many, many times that I've had two lives. It was before 2000 and after 2000 because that event significantly changed my life. It changed who I was. It changed my thinking. It changed, physically where I lived and how I then started living, or not living. You
Mm.
know, everything that I thought that I knew had been taken away from me, and I was lost. I was broken, and I was angry. I hated the world. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to cope. I really didn't. Mm.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's basically the start of, you know, what this whole process is about. I then, and we'll probably, we'll get into it as we do, but the whole process of what I've done recently is that it's taken me 20 something years to acknowledge it and
Mm.
accept it, because I ran from it. I drank, took drugs, engaged in really poor behavior, really high risk behavior to try and numb it, to try and avoid it. And I thought that I had outrun it and I thought that I was better than it and I thought I was bigger than it and stronger. But no, it comes back and bites you on the ass even harder.
Mm. Yeah. So what a shock for you, and you've talked about that shock and the experience of that, and not being able to process it and trying to manage it. Tell us a little bit about what happened afterwards, because I know that your book goes into it more, but tell us about how those risky behaviors manifested themselves for you in your policing world.
Yeah, well, it sort of started, I had 3 months off work and that to me probably sounded like a good thing to do, but I moved up to my sister's place up in Brisbane and everyone's got to go back to their normal lives, but mine didn't. So I'm sitting at home every day by myself. I started drinking earlier and earlier and earlier, and I just started drinking and drinking and drinking because that's what the only way to stop the pain. And that 3 months basically started a big spiral in terms of I then I had 3 months where I was allowed to just drink
Mm.
around the clock, and by that time it was well ingrained in me, and it didn't stop. So I finally went back to work, and you know there was one time even this was probably only 6 months after Karen's death. I used to have a couple of beers after work, and then I'd always have a couple of beers in my lap, but I'd have a couple of beers next to me as I was driving home, and I had a Land Cruiser and like a big four drive, and as I was sort of driving home, it was a dirt road with no lights, and I used to turn the lights off, after about 7 or 8 beers or whatever, turn the lights off and go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, turn it back on and see where I was and try and, you know, recover from where I was going. So
Mm.
well before I even went into undercover, I was doing stupid shit, really stupid shit. Um, I didn't think it was stupid at the time, but I do now.
Mm.
But it got to the stage where a couple of months later, I ran into a bloke who initially talked me into joining the clubs, and he was undercover. And it just happened to be that him and his mates took me into going undercover again, as well. So um, they said there's a course in a couple of months' time, and if you pass it, you'll be in by Christmas time. So you know, I sort of went home that night and I thought to myself, I've got nothing to lose. No one's going to miss me. I got I got no future. Who cares what I do? I can disappear. I can let my hair down. I can do and be whatever I want. And that's how I looked at it. And I went, yep, I'm doing it. And it was the first time that I got a little bit of a spark. I was really numb. I had no sort of spark of anything because, I was still in such the grieving process and didn't know how to deal with it. And once I got that, I thought, wow, I can actually really escape from this whole pain and be someone else and do something else, and I can forget about everything. And I got in. I did a 4 week course where during the day you had all these scenarios about drug dealing and buying and all that sort of all the stuff, and then at night they applied you full of alcohol and see how you sort of handled yourself, and did you talk too much? Were you dickhead? Could you handle your beers? All that sort of stuff, because that's really important. Being an undercover cop, can you hold your drink? Are you going to tell everyone that you're an undercover cop and whatever? Um, I'd had 12 months of pretty heavy practicing, and I flied. I I passed with flying colours. When everyone was passed out, I was putting people to bed, and I was still holding the bar up.
Mm.
And without even knowing what I'd been through, they said, "Yep, he's the man for us." Yep. So I got selected, and next thing you know, I'm at the undercover unit, and it's a statewide one, so you travel all around the state, wherever the jobs are. And the first one it was only an hour up the road, and they printed out this printout which I put in the book, and said, "Your name is now Donnie Wilson." Um, have a look at the details there. Try and remember your date of birth. Try and remember where you're supposed to live. All that sort of bullshit. Pick one of the cars and head up the road. And this is the bloke that you're trying to get. And they give you a file and said, okay, yep. So for the next 9 months, my job was to try and work my way up to get this fella who, the QPS hadn't got in three other operations. And through my I look back now through my stupidity, but through my no care factor and my, where I just did really high risk, stupid things where, by rights, I should have been dead. but just it worked. I managed to get this fella, and he was probably Queensland's biggest drug trafficker at the time, and everyone was patting me on the back and giving me awards and all that sort of bullshit, and I'm going, I don't give a shit about awards. I'm still hurting. I sort of half wanted to die. I really didn't give a shit, and none of it, none of it really sort of excited me. Like I'd walk away halfway through an award ceremony and I'm not doing this shit. No, no, not doing this. Because that's not why I was doing it. No, and yeah, so that was my mindset at the time. Yeah, and that's what I basically did for the next 2 years.
Mm.
Mm.
And what happened after 2 years?
Two, so the very last job, they sent me down to Sydney. So it was an interstate job out of jurisdiction, and it was on other police, so New South Wales police, who, initially I said, no, I don't do that. I'm not doing that. And but then when I read the brief on it, and they were manufacturing MDMA pills like with a pill press, and I said, no, well, they're not cops in my books. They're crooks in blue uniform. Like, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I spent 2 or 3 months down in Sydney, driving a BMW, hanging out at strip joints every night, living in a high rise overlooking, you know, Hyde Park and all that sort of thing. Living the high life, basically, just having a good time.
Mm.
That sort of closed, and I got sent back home, and they said, "Oh, well, your 2 years is up, Todd, and you can report back to Crime Stoppers on Monday. We want to get you back into the structured sort of world where go to work at 8, finish at 4, back in uniform, all of these sort of things, and
Mm.
we'll get you there." So I ended up turning up there at about 9:30 because that was earliest I could sort of get up because I hadn't been up that early in 2 years. And yeah, the senior sergeant wasn't too happy, and I was quite impressed with myself that I was there before midday. But but I got there, and he goes, okay, so gave me the induction, all that sort of stuff, and said, okay, so Crime Stoppers is all about answering phones and the anonymous callers who are dobbing in a drug dealer or dobbing in a crime that's happened or whatever. And one of my first calls, it was just such it just rolled me up so bad because I was still in the undercover world
Mhm.
and I was still angry. I was still, you know, I'd worked out that I'd really had lived that undercover world where violence solved everything because that's what I was used to. And I got this phone call, and a bloke's it was just a insipid little thing where he was just going, oh, I just want to dob my next door neighbour. He's smoking cones and the smell's coming over to my house. And I just started ripping into him. I said, mate, don't you know what a dog is, mate? You don't dog on people. You're going to get yourself killed. Mate, just worry about yourself. And like, oh, mate. And the whole place erupted, and like the senior sergeant comes running over, grabs the phone. No, we don't talk like that. We don't talk like that. But that's not the unwritten rule. You don't dog on people. You don't do that. And so it took me, that was just an example of me trying to get back into normal policing where I was still in the criminal world. And it took me so long to understand that my name's now Todd. That was tough because for so long I had to understand that and recognize and respond to the name Donny. If someone yelled out Donny, I had to sort of go like that. Similarly, if someone said, hey, Todd, couldn't do that either. So you sort of the identity thing was a real tough one to get around.
Mm.
You know, and dealing with all the other shit that I had probably pressed down for 2 years then, because for me, Donny was an escape, and Donny was somewhere where I didn't have to worry about those pressures and those problems that were there prior to that. So not only coming back into the real world and navigating normal life, everything sort of started coming back to coming back, and when I look back now, I I didn't change my behaviours. I stayed as a copper. I went straight into detective work, and yeah, my drinking probably increased. My risky behaviour probably increased, and uh, but everyone looked at me as a bit of a uh, that's what you do, As a back then, it was the drinking days of play hard, work hard. You know, there was it wasn't it wasn't uncommon for a lot of us to finish at a nightclub at 6 in the morning and go straight to work. That was what you did. And then you'd start, as soon as you finish, you drank and you did it again.
Hmm.
And that's what you did. And you played hard, you drank hard, you worked hard. And I did that for many, many years after that. And that was probably part of my coping mechanism because I just did not want to address it. I didn't want to deal with it. It just hurt too much. And it was just easier doing all this other shit, you know? And that's what I did for so many years. And I just avoided it, pushed it down, and convinced myself that I was over it and it was all finished and it's all gone. I'm better than that, blah, blah, blah. I end up, meeting a wonderful lady and I'm still married to her now. And, we've got a 20-year-old son. And when that sort of happened, I realized that, I've got to put this shit behind me. I've got to live a normal life now. And, you know, I'd say about 60% of the time I was good, 40% I wasn't good at first. And, I'd always fall off the wagon and have a bit of a blowout. And then every now and then you know, I'd get back on the thing. No, I've got to be a good husband, got to be a good dad, I've got to be present, I've got to be whatever. And it wasn't until, many years later that I realized, you know, I wasn't really present. I wasn't that good. I was still focused on myself. I was still focused on poor me. Um, but I didn't know how to deal with it either. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to address it. I didn't know how to understand it. Um, so I'd have to say it's not until the last 5 years that I've really taken those steps to go to that next level. And I'm still very much in the healing journey now. I'm probably only halfway through it. Writing the book was one part of it, and it was really, really awesome, and I loved it. But there's still so much more to do.
Mm. Was there a particular point, Todd? You say you started like in the last 5 years, you realised that you needed to change. Was there a particular moment when that penny sort of dropped and you went, hang on a sec, I haven't addressed this. I really need to
There was a
change this
few.
again."
There was a
Yeah.
few, but one particular one was, I was a sergeant as a supervisor for a tactical crime squad, which we did sort of you know one or two levels down from the SWAT type thing. We weren't fully kitted up and doing the like really dangerous stuff, but we're sort of mid-level where um, a high risk person who's on the run from the police and wasn't too dangerous, we'd go and sort of get them. So it had its dangers.
Mm.
Um, and there was times when we probably should have called CERT or SWAT or whatever it was, because I do remember this one particular time where there was alleged that these blokes had stolen some machine guns, and our job was to you know smash the door in and get them. So, um, but what we decided was just to drive through the garage and smash the whole thing in and jump out of the car and run around the house and try and find these bricks. Um, what I noticed is I was asleep in the passenger seat the whole time until we hit the garage door. I said, "Well, are we here? Are we here? Yeah, yeah, boys, get out, get out." And like I'm the supervisor, but still, that didn't excite me. I didn't find that gate didn't give me an adrenaline rush at all. I was just relaxed. I was just like, ah, it's too early in the morning for this shit. And and then I was like, man, that's what's wrong with me? What is going on? You know,
Mm.
that should have really sparked my excitement, but no, no, I'd rather just relax and just sit in the passenger seat. And and then it was probably only about a year or two later, and I'd been there for 10 years, and my behaviour changed quite considerably. I noticed I got really angry. I got snappy. Um, my boss continually said to me, "Mate, all the staff have had enough of you. They've really got the shits with you, mate. You're just yelling at them. You're down their throats. You're just, what's going on?" type thing.
Mm.
Um, and I said, well, they're just not. I just looked at them. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. Um, I didn't. It took me a while to recognise that that was when it really hit me hard. Um, and then it was the anniversary of Karen's death. No, it was her birthday. It was, sorry,
Mm.
birthday, and I sort of made like a just a RIP tribute thing to her on my Facebook, and all hell broke loose at home, and it was disrespectful, and my wife's friends were saying the same thing and everything, and and I lost my nanas. I took off for days, and no one knew where I was, and all that sort of stuff, and that was probably when I really went, this is not good. This is not good. I really hit the skids big time, and I started looking to get out of the place because I knew it just wasn't good for me anymore.
Mm.
And I finally did get out in 2023. It took me a couple of years, but it really made a massive difference. It's almost like I can see clearly now. Um, I've got my sleep in order. I've got my nutrition in order. I've got my exercise. The shift work just absolutely ruined me. I was just living on fumes, really. I was constantly tired, and that was probably the first time when it really sort of hit me, and I went, yeah, okay, there's something really wrong here. And and then when I left the police, I I went back to my GP, and he goes, mate, you should be jumping out of your skin. I said, well, I am, but geez, I'm tired. I said, maybe it's just 27 years of catching up from sleep. How long's that going to take, you reckon? He said, no, you should be right on now. You're sleeping 10 hours a night.
Mm.
And anyways, he sent me to a sleep specialist. And, you know, I had to have all the things all over my head and everything. Spent the night in hospital. And then the process the next day was every 2 hours, they would make me, well, close the curtains and say, okay, now sleep, Todd. Okay. So that was at 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And, you know, I sort of finished the day and went home. And a couple of weeks later, I went to the specialist and got the results. And he goes, mate, you're about the only person in the history of this doing it where you slept almost immediately every time after that happening. When they said go to sleep, you went to sleep every 2 hours. Within 3 minutes, you were gone.
Mm.
I said, I'm so tired. I think it's just me catching up for whatever. And he goes, no, mate, have a look at all of this. Have a look at all of this. And he showed me all the whatever. He goes, mate, the activity in your brain is just working overload. You're in fight and flight mode constantly. You're running a marathon every night in your brain because of all of the traumas you've seen and all of these things. And he goes, no wonder you're so tired in the morning. He said, you're stuffed. I said, yeah, but I sleep solidly for 10 hours. He goes, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Mm.
Doesn't matter. And, even to this day, I still, we've had to put pillows in between me and my wife because, you know, I'm constantly fighting. I'm always punching her back or punching the wall or punching the side of the bed because people are attacking me and I'm hitting back. I'm fighting back. it's always like I'm in that fight and flight mode, and it's just like, oh man, I can't do this anymore. I really can't. So I started a journey to go, well, how do I fix it?
Mm,
And I don't think I'm halfway there, and I'm almost there, I think. But at least at least I've finally acknowledged it, and I've worked out, and I've realised what I've done wrong over the many years. So
mm.
mm,
And when you talked about some of those things that were helping you, you went right back to basics. You talked about getting your sleep in order. You talked about nutrition. You talked about doing some exercise, which we know are the three main things, plus getting outside, sort of four main things that help us stay grounded and manage stress. All that trauma that has gone on and is still going on in your brain at times of sleeping. Tell us a little bit more about some of the other steps that you've managed to take that have brought you to where you are now.
it's just little steps. Sometimes it's one step back and two steps forwards, and then the next day it's one step back and five steps forward. And but what I do know, and I keep coming back to sleep. Sleep is my number one. If I get that into control,
Mm,
I'm on a good process. I really am. Um, but I also, I was an old rugby league player. I loved playing rugby league before all of this happened, and so I went back to coaching, and I did a lot of coaching started with under 12s and went all the way through to A grade, and I just found volunteering, being part of a community, and just being around like-minded people where you know I could assimilate with how they feel in terms of footy, having a laugh. They made me feel a bit young, and but at the same token, what I noticed is that I really could identify which kid was struggling and which ones having hard times, and I felt like I could really sort of pull them aside and help them a little bit. I felt I had something that just a lot of the other dads or other coaches would be like, no, I didn't see that, um, but I felt like I had that, and a few people have said that to me recently, saying, well, you know, you're lucky that you got that sixth sense now, and my answer to that is, well, I wish I didn't have to go through what I did to have that. I would have loved to have just done a course, but
yeah.
because it's pretty painful what I did, what I had to go through. Um, but if there's anything positive to come out of it, I do have that. I have that knack that I really, and I have that empathy. I see that softer side of people now, and I can see when they're really struggling. I now see when they're having those anger moments, and it's out of character, and I go, hang on, something's going on here. And yeah, I find helping people now is it actually really, really helps me.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
there's that funny thing, isn't there, about I've got my kindness sweatshirt on, but there's this funny thing about kindness and helping somebody else out is how amazing it makes you feel at the same
Yeah,
time as being able to do that. And you talked about
yeah.
police, and you talked about that machoism in policing, especially back in the 90s and the early 2000s when, that was a big thing. It certainly was here in the UK. I'm assuming that Australian policing wasn't much different. And so
Mhm.
you've got that culture. You're surrounded by people who are quite strong, powerful, big characters, including yourself. And then you write this book and you share your story. I, how was that, Todd? How was that? Was there a bit of nervousness around sharing the story, and what has the impact of that been on other people?
There was slight nervousness, slight,
Mm.
just very minor. Yeah, it was just in the back of my mind. It wasn't something that I constantly thought about because um, when I decided to do it, I said, I'm all in. Um, I'm sick of I'm sick of being stuck in the mud. I don't want to spend my next 20 years like I have been. My next 20 years, I want to be my best 25 years before, things really start going south. And I just went, you know what? I'm sick of running from it. I'm sick of hiding from it. And it wasn't until just dipping my toe in the water and realizing just how important it was and how many people responded to it. And it just gave me confidence by the day with the responses that I got from people. I initially wrote the book as an undercover book, and then it was a long process to bring, the suicide of Karen in and join them in because I just hadn't thought about it because I put it out of my brain, and I didn't realize until I started, you know, preparing for the book, just how connected they were.
Mm.
And you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar to work that out now, but I didn't want to address that. And and then once I sort of started putting it all together, finished it, I felt good about myself, and I went, this is all about me. It's my journey. I want to help myself. And I was pretty proud of that. And I went, yep, I don't care if I've sold 10, 10 books, every one of my family members and my uncles and aunties and cousins will buy one and I'll be happy. And, but it's actually grown bigger than what I expected. The amount of people, I get at least a message or two a day, just from either people I do know or don't know, saying, Todd, you have no idea what you've done to help me. Or my mum, she experienced the same thing as you, and I've got her to read it, and oh man, it's just so good. Tough footy players that I thought might have mocked it, type thing. You know, within within minutes, they're tearing up and telling me about dramas that they've got in their life, and one thing I've noticed now is that everyone's going through some sort of drama, some sort of issue in their life that's causing them distress.
Mm.
And a lot of people don't know how to talk about it. They don't know how to get it off their chest. Sometimes it just needs a quick 20-minute thing of just saying, "Blah, this is what it's like." Um, and one thing I've noticed with my book is that I've gone, hey, guess what? This is my book. I've written a book. And they went, you write a book? I didn't think you could even write, all those sort of funny ones. And I said,
Yeah.
yeah, nor could I. It was just, it was just luck. Um, and I break the ice by that one. And they go, what's it about? And I tell them, and they go, I've known you for 15 years. How did I not know about this shit? I said, well, I never talked about it. You know, I didn't. A lot of these blokes that I knew from footy or coaching or something, and I said, well, it's not like at half time I'd say, oh, guess what happened to me 26 years ago? I don't do that. And I just kept it down, and every one of them said, man, that's ballsy. You got balls, Tom. I said, again, you're tough. That's strength. That's real strength. And I said, well, you know what the real strength is? Is actually putting your hand up and saying, yeah, I, I, I either did have a drama or I do have a drama in my head and I don't know how to deal with it and I need help. And, the old thing of, the strong and silent, which I thought I was doing for so long because that's what, the generation above me did.
Mm.
Um, it didn't serve me any good at all. And I just went, no, I'm going to buck the system here. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that shit. Um, I was probably someone that was waiting for someone to take that step because I didn't have the strength. I didn't have all of those things. I don't know where I got it, but I just woke up and I found it one day, and I went, if if I'm you know if, if I've been waiting for someone to do it, there's probably a lot of other people waiting for someone to do it, and I've got the story, so it's my turn to do it, and it's my duty. And I said to myself, it's my duty to do
Yeah,
it.
I love that. So because I feel, Todd, what you've done is you've created a safe space. So when people read your book and they look at you and they know you, even if they don't know you, they're like, "Oh my word, you've created a safe space for me to be able to share that I have got some stuff going on and actually I do need some help." So that's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, that's what I feel you've done. So it's
I've
amazing.
gone to the I've sort of gone to the next level, going back to, junior coaching or even A grade coaching where they're young men, 18 to 30-year-olds. And I've tried to normalize it to them and say, okay, if you actually break your arm on the game on the weekend or break your ankle or break your foot, whatever, would you tell your coach? Would you tell the medical staff? Would you tell your trainer? Yeah, yeah, I would. Yeah. Okay. What if you had a traumatic event or your brain just wasn't thinking the same as what it always has been, and you knew that something was wrong? Would you tell anyone? Oh, no, 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 no. I said, well, the injury to your body through a footy, tackle or whatever, it's no different to something that's happened there. And you need to treat it the same. You know, if you had a broken ankle, what would you do? You go to the hospital and you get plaster on it. And then what would you do after that? You'd rest and you'd let it heal and you'd let the bone sort of, join again and then you get the plaster off and then you go and do physio. And I said, well, your brain's no different, mate. You've
Mm,
got to do all of these things to, to help your brain reset and all of exactly like an injury to the other part of your body. And and I said, and it shouldn't be looked upon as any different. And each time I've said this story, I get so many nods and the kids are like, yeah. When I say kids, they're still 20, 21, 22, and
yeah.
they go, oh yeah, 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 that makes sense. And and I think the way that I'm looking at it now is that, it's not going to happen overnight, but the more people like yourself and me and others talk about it and normalize it and make it a part of our conversations every day,
Mm,
it will eventually get that way.
yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. And I think that's
Yeah.
a great place to end this conversation. And I just want to say, Todd, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your story. I really appreciate it. And
Yeah, thank you very much.
I know that people listening, I shall go back and listen to this, and I know there'll be loads of things that I take away from it,
Oh,
just
good.
from listening to you. So thank you so much.
Good. I wish I listened to myself 20 years ago too. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Todd.
thank thank you, Nikki.